So let's start with the Pan-African Writers Association. They're having a continental colloquium that's leading highly prized writers and academics from Africa and the diaspora. They're expecting President Akufo-Addo to be speaking there. We can cross over to them at this moment for that program.
At the University of Yaoundé front, Pro-Chancellor of the University of Chang, Cameroon, Vice President of the Cameroon Assembly Academy of Sciences, Fellow of the New York Academy of Science, and President of the Assembly of Academicians of the African Academy of Languages of the African Union. He has served as Vice Chancellor or Rector of 4 universities: University of Yaoundé 1, University of Ngaoundéré, University of Chang, and the Information and Communication University, USA, Cameroon campus. He had previously served as Deputy Director of Higher Education in the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research in Cameroon, with special responsibility for piloting the 1993 Cameroon University reforms, and Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of Bouaké from 1993 to 1997, before serving as Vice Chancellor. He has been full professor of linguistics since 1982, with specialization in generative phonology, applied linguistics, and language planning. He has over 130 publications in the area of linguistics, language, and national development. His academic and professional activities span over 46 years of teaching and research at the university level, including university management in the USA, Nigeria, and Cameroon. This was carried out concomitantly with regular academic activities as visiting professor and responsibility for conferences, thesis supervision and examination, and research or evaluation of development projects in several countries in the world, including Britain, Canada, France, Belgium, Romania, Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, Japan, India, and so on, and most countries of Africa. He has served as member of the Executive Board of the Association of African Universities, member of Council of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, ancien membre du Conseil scientifique de l'Agence universitaire de la Francophonie, member of the 8-member nucleus of the African Academy of Languages, an organ of the African Union, and member of the Scientific Committee of CODESRA, among others. He is cited as Man of the Year 2000 in the book 1000 Scholars of the 20th Century by the Cambridge Biological Society, as well as in Who is Who in the Francophonie, Qui fait la Francophonie, Paris, 2005. He is also cited and conferred with the Presidential Award by the American Biographical Society for contributions to linguistics and higher education. He served as member of the Board of Directors of the Consortium Language in Contact and Conflict in Africa. He is solicited to serve as consultant for several government and international organizations, such as the African Union, Association of Canadian Colleges and Universities, UNESCO, UNECA, AAU, ACU, AUF, and so on. He is a regular keynote speaker in international conferences on issues of language, culture, communication, and national development, as well as on matters of higher education management since 1985. May I now invite Professor Chumbo to give his talk.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, Professor Atukwai Okai, Secretary General of the Pan-African Writers Association, honorable ministers, distinguished diplomats, all protocol duly respected, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, I consider it a great honor and privilege to address the Pan-African Writers Association's colloquium today, especially since this is in the presence of Your Excellency, the President of the Republic. I'm going to talk briefly on a topic which is dear to my heart, and I've titled it, Which Language for African Literature? Language of the heart or language of the head? And I'm inspired by a quotation from a great man. If you speak to someone in a language he understands, it goes to his head. If you speak to him in his language, it goes to his heart. Mandela. Quotation from Mandela. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this statement by the Madiba is a metaphor that contrasts language of the heart and language of the head. What is the difference between the two? Mandela's observation correctly and very dramatically captures a profound psycholinguistic truth, namely that one of the core functions of language, especially the first language learned by a child, is to express identity, especially ethno-linguistic identity and ethno-cultural identity. When you hear someone speak your language, there is a spontaneous identification with that individual. So I shall refer to the mother tongue or the African languages in this discourse as the language of the heart, and to the second language or foreign languages in Africa as the language of the head. Of course, the situation is more complex than that, but that dichotomy will be sufficient. There has indeed been a very long-standing debate among African writers and literary artists concerning the question which language should be used for African literature, the foreign languages, English, French, and Portuguese, or African languages. And the debate started in 1962 and has gone on for decades. As a matter of fact, there are publications in 2016 and 2017 on the issue, a controversy. In fact, I saw titles for this conference which will be addressing the issue. So it has been a raging debate, and we know that on one side of the debate there has been Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a famous writer from Kenya, who was James Ngugi in the 50s and 60s and wrote books that we read. And then there was a metamorphosis, a change, more like the Damascus experience, transforming a Saul to a Paul. And James Ngugi became Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And it was not just a change of name. He was so inspired by the experience that he changed his attitude, his philosophy, his mentality, and became a prophet for those who believe in African languages, for African literature. On the other hand, we had the Venerable Chinua Achebe, who took the position that English, French, and Portuguese have been given to us and we need to use them as arms. I do not intend to fuel the debate any further. In fact, I'm coming to the debate armed not with gallons of petrol, but with a fire extinguisher. So bear with me. The first thing I want us to consider is that in the present state of events, European languages are used by a minority of Africans. European languages in Africa are used by a minority. As a matter of fact, the statistics would show that only about 10 to 40% of Africans speak the official languages of our various countries. 10% in some countries like Southern Sudan, and 40% in some countries like Ghana and Nigeria, but not much more than that. What does this mean? It means that over 60% of our people in Africa speak a language that is uniquely or essentially African. That is food for thought, isn't it? 60% of our people speak African languages, but the official languages are spoken by a minority. Another fact to consider is that more literature is produced and generated in European languages than in African languages. I'm sure most of you who are writers here, you write in European languages. Very few write in African languages. And that's a paradox, because we have said there are fewer people who speak African languages, who speak European languages. And the literature we generate is more in European languages. Another important point I want us to consider is that research has shown that there is a very clear relationship between knowledge production and the language of the heart, the first language. Research has shown that bilinguals, people speaking more than one language, experience strong emotions when speaking and hearing their language compared to the second or third language. Cartwell and Harris have a detailed psycholinguistic research. I will spare you the trouble of going to all of the jargons, but let me simply say that that research shows that artistic creation, including creative writing and other forms of writing, are triggered by intense feelings or emotions. In other words, when people feel very intensely and emotionally so, they're more likely to create, whether they're writing poetry or drama. It comes from emotions. And the research shows that these emotions are more connected to the first language than any other language in the repertoire or constellation of languages that the speaker may have. The first language is associated with emotions. Concretely, this means if we have many of our writers, as we do have, who are excellent in terms of their productivity in English, poetry, or drama, Femi Oshofisong, Atukwe Okai, well known for their works in English, it means that if they were to write in their mother tongue, the level of production will be even greater. That's what the empirical research shows. So if we want to increase the productivity and the quality of our production, scientifically and otherwise, we need to take that into consideration. Another important fact, empirically observable, is that we live in the 21st century. Our century is often called the century of knowledge economy. What does this mean, knowledge economy? It means that our century is characterized by industrialization, economic progress, national development, and all of the things that lead to what we have referred to as emergence. We want to emerge. And emergence is determined essentially by the quantity and quality of knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, knowledge appropriation, and knowledge management. In short, knowledge is what determines whether countries are considered developed or underdeveloped or developing. Knowledge is the variable. And so knowledge production is crucial to whether we're going to merge emerge or not. Curiously, Africa lags behind tragically in knowledge production. Why? Because, among other things, Africa is the continent where most activities of knowledge production are still carried out in a foreign language. And indeed, knowledge production, and in this I'm including literary and artistic creation, knowledge production essentially or uniquely in an exoglossic or foreign language, official language in Africa, as is presently the case, is very, very detrimental with respect to our aspirations to achieve emergence. Because only those who master the language of research, language of creation very well, are involved in the creation of knowledge and the production of knowledge. And what that means is that there are very, very few Africans, relatively, who are involved in production of knowledge. We do not have a critical mass of Africans involved in research that can produce marketable knowledge. Because to create, you need to think at a very high level, and language and there's no level playing field if we continue to use a language that is only second to us. Furthermore, the relatively small quantity of original knowledge produced by Africans under these adverse circumstances, and also the free or open access knowledge which we get in Africa from the global community, that knowledge is available to us, but it is not accessible to the majority of Africans. The majority of Africans who need this knowledge in order to grow, in order to extricate themselves from poverty and want, the knowledge that they need to shake themselves out of poverty, that knowledge is available but not accessible. Why? Because in most cases, it is hoarded in the official global languages of importance, English and French and Portuguese, which is known only by a few of us. So that the majority, 60 to 70% who need this knowledge do not have access to the knowledge and therefore cannot be motivated and galvanized to participate in the development process. Therefore, with some political will, to reach out to the masses of the population, especially the masses in the rural community who need this knowledge, so that they can become knowledgeable, dynamic agents of transformation and change in our government projects. To reach out to these people, we need policies that will democratize access to information and knowledge by making that knowledge available to our people in the language that they know and speak, the language, the mother tongue, in addition to English and French and Portuguese. Now, this leads us to proposing an answer to the question that we raised. Which language for African literature? Which language for development of Africa? The language of the heart or the language of the head? My answer is the language of the heart. The language of the heart. But in partnership with the language of the head. Language of the heart in partnership of the language of the head. And I'm not just trying to be nice. I'm going to tell you why. We proposed language of the heart, the African languages, and gradually moving on to having the languages, the African languages, to take over when these languages have been sufficiently instrumentalized. And by that, I'm talking in linguistic terms. We will have to provide these languages with terminology that they need to express new knowledge in science and technology and so on. There's a lot of things that we can do very rapidly if there's a political will. We have what it takes to bring these languages quickly to assume new functions. And so we're talking about a partnership between the languages, the language of the heart and the language of the head. Now, why is the partnership of African languages and the official languages inevitable for now? Why don't we go straight for the African languages? Okay, let me answer. The second question is, why should language planning in Africa ultimately favor the development of the languages of the heart, African languages? Both of these questions have been answered, but let me summarize. In answering the second question, it must be said that there is the ideological reason for us to favor African languages on the long run, and this reminds us of the commitment during the struggle for the liberation of Africa, fighting for independence and ensuring the development of Africa within the tenets of the cultural renaissance. Beyond ideology, there are very, very practical reasons. No independent nation goes through the development cycle using only a foreign language. We all know some bit of history. Greece and the empire, the civilization, developed and used Greek as the language of civilization for its empire. When the pendulum of civilization moved from Greece to Rome, what happened? Rome and the Romans jettisoned Greek. They threw out Greek and developed their own language, Latin, which became the language of the entire Roman Empire, including Britain and France. That was the language of civilization in those days. And then when history turned its face towards Europe, and we had the Anglo-Saxons, the ancestors of Great Britain, and the Gaulois, the ancestors of France, who were considered barbarians by the Romans. When they now had the turn to take over civilization, what happened? They developed English and French and imposed these languages on their colonies, and that's why we have English and French. Now, this is very simple. This has been the pattern, because effective development, Your Excellency, effective development is best carried out in the language of the people. Therefore, like Greece, Rome, Britain, and France of yesteryears, Japan, China, Korea today, and all the countries of East Asia which are emerging and have emerged, like all of these, Africa has not only the duty, but the responsibility to develop and use African languages for African development. Besides this, there is the avalanche of psycholinguistic evidence in favor of the mother tongue or language of the heart as the prime mover of inventions and creativity. If we want our children to develop their natural genius to the highest, they need to be taught in the mother tongue, as UNESCO says, as far up the ladder of education as possible. And UNESCO has also demonstrated and requires, and we're all members of UNESCO, that in a multilingual setting, the best educational approach in a multilingual setting is what is referred to as the mother tongue-based multilingual education, meaning that you begin education in the language, in the home language, and gradually add the other languages in various doses, and you very rapidly produce multilinguals. And there will be no problem of English, French, or mother tongue. The children will learn all of these languages in a program that obeys certain methodological considerations which are available from the research that has been made. We have also demonstrated that competition in the age of knowledge economy requires the development and use of African languages if we want to produce knowledge and be competitive in this age. Now, why is the partnership with language of the head necessary? Why do we need to partner with the foreign languages? Well, number one, the colonial heritage, our colonial heritage, and its impact is such that these languages are needed in the short run. Among the many complex issues observed in this respect, many Africans have these languages as their mother tongue. Oh yes, there are people who speak no African language, and they speak only English or French. Now, they cannot be marginalized in the process of development by excluding them from the development process, because that will amount to reverse discrimination. Secondly, besides, many, many writers, including many of you, are very, very conversant and proficient in the use of European languages, and their creative genius will be stifled if we decree that African languages alone should be used. They do make contributions in writing in this language. So that's a reality we must face. I have argued elsewhere in Liège and presented a paper in Liège recently that Britain and France do not have a monopoly of the English and French language. They are as much African languages as they are European languages, ideology aside. They have become African languages of European origin. And they need to be patrimonialized. That's a term I've coined for that, meaning that we need to adopt them as part of our patrimony and heritage, even if they result from a very bitter experience, colonization. As a matter of fact, North Africa gives us a good example. Arabic is accepted in North Africa as the language. But in years gone by, it was being rejected by the local population as an imperialist language. We are too close to the phenomenon of colonization. That's why we keep thinking about it as something. But our children's children will not see anything wrong with using English and French, and therefore we have better start using them along with our languages, as long as we classify them as second division heritage languages. Furthermore, many African languages have not yet undergone the development processes necessary to become full vectors of knowledge and need to be empowered. As I said, we need to instrumentalize these languages, and the process is on for many of our languages. So once they become strong enough to assume responsibility, they may play a greater role. The partnership that we envisage for the two categories of languages in the short run guarantees that governments will reach out to a greater portion of the population, to a vast majority of the population, because you will reach out to those who speak English and French, but you also reach out to those who use African languages. Whereas using just one of them, you are going to marginalize and exclude some of the population from the process. So we will need these two languages to ensure greater participation in governance by having what we call communicative, participatory communication. Your Excellency, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, unless we give African languages economically valorizing functions by making them share the economic functions now monopolized by English and French, in other words, unless our people see that African languages can put food on the table, like English and French, they will not attach much value to our languages and will not send their children to schools learning these languages. Those countries that have made a lot of progress in the development and use of African languages are those that have given some valorizing functions to these languages. They are languages of administration, languages of local government, languages of parliament, and so on. So when the people see that these languages can have a value economically, then that would ensure that the languages are learned. There is therefore a need to implement the African Union's language policy, which requires that African countries should develop and use African languages for education, administration, governance, in the perspective of the partnership with the official languages. While there are certainly differences between the language of the head and the language of the heart, with the language of the heart having a special place in our hearts, while this is true, the two are neither antagonistic nor antinomous. In other words, these languages are complementary and can be used to ensure that we reach out to our people. They can be used to ensure that they work together and should be used. We congratulate the Pan-African Writers Association for all they have done for languages. And it is our hope that the Pan-African Writers Association will partner with the African Academy of Languages, ACALAN, a specialized institution of the African Union, to henceforth advocate and promote the partnership of the language of the heart and the language of the head for Africa to emerge and take its place in the concert of nations. Miyaka, Nagode, Shokran, Asante, merci pour votre aimable attention. May God bless Africa. Thank you.
Those are live visuals coming to you from the Pan-African Writers Association Continental Colloquium. They're leading a highly prized writers and academics from Africa and the diaspora. And the President, Nana Addo Akufo-Addo, is there. We'll be expecting him to speak. But you just heard Professor Emeritus Beban Same Chumbo. He is the PAWA Vice President, and he's been talking about the language barriers. Basically, he mentions writing in appropriate language, and the fact that when you do that, you get to the heart of the people you're trying to communicate to. He speaks about the fact that every piece of literature is virtually in European language, or is written in a European language, English or French. The fact that African language has not been economized in his words. He says that Africa is lagging behind in knowledge production because our write-ups, the write-ups that we refer to, are mainly written in English. He's actually proposing a common language as a way of getting out of poverty. Professor Emeritus Beban also says that the British, the French have been able to economize their language, and that the African language ought to be given an economic function, just like the British have done, just like the French have done, if we want to achieve much. Very soon we'll be going back to the auditorium to hear from more speakers, including President Nana Addo Akufo-Addo there. We can take a very quick break now, and when we return, we'll take you back to the auditorium. This is The Pulse with me, Gifty and Dorpia. Yeah, welcome back to the show. We can now quickly go back to the Labadi Beach Hotel, where President Akufo-Addo is already addressing the Continental Colloquium there. We can hear him.
I'm very grateful for the invitation from the long-standing Secretary General of the Pan-African Writers Association. The distinguished Ghanaian poet, Atukwe Okai, to be part of these proceedings and for the reorganization of your program to enable me to attend. More so, for the immediacy and relevance of the theme of this year's 24th International African Writers' Day Colloquium, language, library, and the book industry. Urgent agenda for Africa's destiny. It has everything to do with the future of our continent. I don't know which of our languages it is that has this saying, but I have heard it said that somewhere in West Africa there is a saying that every time an elder dies, a library burns with him. You need not need to know or understand whichever of our languages this saying originated from to understand exactly what is meant. I believe we're saying that every time an elder dies, some amount of stored knowledge disappears with him. Undoubtedly, one of Africa's most revered leaders was Nelson Mandela, and he was blessed with a long life. He passed on in 2013 at the ripe age of 95. We shall continue to miss Madiba and his influence on the continent, and there will continue to be moments when we would all wonder what he would have said or done if he was still around. But I dare say when he died, the library did not burn with him. Whilst he was still alive, a lot was written about him that survives, and modern technology means we have audio and video recordings of him that survive. He himself wrote, and his books are available to enable us to have this perspective, even though he's no longer with us. There might be disagreements on how his words and actions are interpreted and analyzed, but there will be no dispute on what he said and where he said it, and for those to whom these aspects are important, how he was dressed on a particular day. There's no danger of the Mandela story being told only from the perspective of those who do not like him. For centuries, we Africans have bemoaned the fact that the African story is told largely by non-Africans who are unsympathetic to our traditions and points of view. The monumental evidence of Timbuktu and its libraries and documents notwithstanding, several amongst us accepted that there was no written history of Africa. And indeed, some claimed there was no history of this continent and its peoples. Several amongst us accepted that ours was a purely oral tradition. I'm proud, and we should all be proud, that Timbuktu exists to expose the lie that the worth of this continent and its civilization can only be measured from the time of colonization. The much respected former South African president, Thabo Mbeki, therefore deserves the undying gratitude of all of us Africans that he has had the courage to embark on the project to rehabilitate and save the ancient manuscripts and documents of Timbuktu. Every self-respecting African was horrified at the events of 2012 when self-proclaimed Islamic militants launched attacks on Timbuktu, determined to destroy the ancient manuscripts and artifacts. There should be no hesitation in condemning the barbaric attack on our collective patrimony, and we should resolve to protect and preserve this World Heritage Site. Timbuktu represents the tangible evidence of Africa's greatness and its contribution to scholarship and the history of humanity. It is well renowned as a center of trade and a center of research and scholarship.
Well, apologies for that mix-up there. We're working on that. But you just heard President Akufo-Addo coming to us live from the Labadi Beach Hotel, where we're having the PAWA Continental Colloquium. The President has been speaking about the future of Africa and how it is connected to, of course, to our language. Just so you know, this colloquium is on the theme language, library and the book industry, the urgent agenda for Africa's destiny. And that's why they keep talking about language and how it could help Africa get out of poverty and how it could enhance the lives of Africans as well. So President Akufo-Addo there made mention of how there is a saying actually that when an elder dies, a library dies with them. He's saying, he refers to Nelson Mandela, and he says that when that man died, for example, the library did not die with him because there are a lot of material about his life, a lot of material about him, some written by him, available for everybody else to learn from. He says that we should, as a people, not hesitate to condemn anybody or any group of people who try to run down our heritage as Africans. So we're working on that to bring you those live pictures from there. We can go back now to the Labadi Beach Hotel. The President is still speaking.
Trade and knowledge. In my view, it is sad to boast about a rich past if poverty defines your contemporary reality. I refer to Timbuktu to make the point that if Africa is to gain respect and be accorded its rightful place in the world, we have to shed the cloak of poverty that currently defines us. I refer to Timbuktu to make the point that knowledge production, scholarship and aesthetics tend to flourish when and where there is prosperity. Throughout the world, it has been shown that education provides the fastest route out of poverty. For you, who are our intellectuals, may I dare say that there is no need for us to engage in futile battles along ideological lines. Education provides the equity that we all seek. We have to get our populations educated. We have to get the skills that are required to compete in the modern economy. And we have to gain the self-confidence that comes from being truly independent. This means that you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the writers of the African story, carry a great responsibility. When you write, what you write must have integrity. What is written about Africa by African writers must have the ultimate reference status. We have a responsibility to be brutally frank to and about ourselves. There is nothing to be gained from trying to paint a false picture about ourselves as a way of redressing the centuries of being maligned. There is a place for praise singing as an art form, as entertainment, and probably as a source of genealogy. But when praise singing is offered as the official assessment of government performance, then we are inflicting as much damage as those who seek to demean Africa. When our writers produce books, treatises, articles, and dissertations that deliberately distort the truth because it serves their personal preferences, they discredit Africa. African writers have played a remarkable role in the liberation of our continent from imperialism. They have set the tone for the discourse about our identity. Many of our battles have been waged and won with the pen and without any guns or bombs. For people of my generation, it was Cheikh Anta Diop, the legendary Senegalese writer and historian, who supplied the intellectual backbone to prop up our pride in being black. Some say that for many people, Nadine Gordimer's books defined the evil of apartheid and did as much to fight apartheid as any bomb that was thrown. And the same can be said for Alan Paton's Cry the Beloved Country. Chinua Achebe opened up the joys, the pains, the bewilderment and attractions of Nigeria to the world with the majesty and power of his writings. Wole Soyinka could and continues to entertain, irritate, question, and educate with his elegantly chosen words and still leave you in no doubt about his identity. Ngugi wa Thiong'o fights Kenyan battles and beyond and sets out to decolonize our minds and make us take pride in Africa. Nuruddin Farah, with his novels and plays, enables us to see and hear another Somalia, apart from the headline Somalia of bombs and killing fields. Our Kwesi Brew, enchanted with his poetry. Amata Edu exemplifies in Ngugi wa Thiong'o's famous words that the written words, too, can sing. Her plays and essays capture the imagination and speak directly and unambiguously. Ayikoyama's novels pronounce vividly the emotional realities and challenges of post-colonial Africa. And Nigeria's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie leads the current pack of young writers today who are holding forth the torch of the African writers. African writers have never shirked away from any subject, and they were very prominent in the struggle for political liberation. J.B. Dankwa, the doyen of Ghana politics, wrote plays, poems, and long essays, and gave us the treatise on the Akan doctrine of God, and his scholarship gave our nation its name of Ghana. Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, was a powerful polemicist and wrote widely on politics in a variety of subjects, advancing in eloquent terms the case for the political unification of our continent. Before them, Joseph Casely Hayford, he of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, that helped at the end of the 19th century preserve indigenous control of Ghanaian lands from the greedy grasp of British colonialism, wrote Ethiopia Unbound, that set out the early Pan-African dream. Chief Obafemi Awolowo and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, leading Nigerian statesmen of their era, were prolific writers. The first Senegalese president, Leopold Sedar Senghor, was an acclaimed poet and cultural theorist. It makes me begin to wonder what has happened to those that have followed the early African leaders. We do not seem to have the poet or playwright or essayist, president, or politicians anymore. I leave you to put your collective minds to that. And I'll be interested in hearing what you come up with as an explanation. I dare say I should be able to make a contribution to that discourse. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I note from the theme of your colloquium that there's likely to be a battle royal fought over language, and this author of the statement has indicated that. This is a subject that has always sparked a lot of passion and is likely to continue to do so. I look forward to hearing the reports of your deliberations, which I hope will encompass the prodigious work that is being undertaken at the Center for Advanced Studies of African Society, based in Cape Town, led by the Ghanaian scholar Kwesi Kwapra, which is seeking to produce unified orthographies, lexicons, and vocabularies out of the myriad of African language to facilitate their use as effective instruments of modern education, research, and social development. For the moment, suffice it to go back to Nelson Mandela, and I too will quote him when he said, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart." Unquote. This, to me, reinforces the validity of the work Kwesi Pra and others are doing to harmonize the estimated 1,500 to 2,000 languages said to be spoken in Africa. But as you ruminate over that one, let me tell you a story about language that should interest us all. A famous American university is said to have introduced a special course in Mandarin Chinese in 1994. Very few students turned up, and for the next 5 years, there was pressure to give up and stop the course. Fortunately for all concerned, the university persisted and kept the unpopular course going. In the past 5 years, this course in Mandarin Chinese is the most popular course in the university, with standing room only in the lecture room. I doubt that the course has become any more difficult or easier. What has happened since 1994, though, is that the status of China in the world has changed dramatically. Students can see the evidence of this change all around them. They do not need to be coaxed or coerced into taking a course to learn the Chinese language. They know it is in their interest to learn that language. I believe there is a lesson in there for us, which extends beyond language. When our young people do not see a future in their countries and cross the Sahara Desert on foot and drown in the Mediterranean Sea in a desperate bid to reach the mirage of a better life in Europe, no amount of beautiful lyrics will change our image. When our economies grow and improve, our young people get educated and are self-confident and full of hope, the world finds its way to our doors, and the language and history of our countries become attractive to our own and foreign universities. When the African economies improve and there's increasing prosperity, we will find that more and more people will care about the environment and the arts, and indeed, the sciences will thrive. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, distinguished writers of Africa, tell the African story truthfully and with flair. Give praise where it has been earned and criticism where it is deserved. When the integrity of the writer is compromised, the library is well and truly burnt. I count on you to keep alive the libraries in your various communities, for that indeed is part of the urgent agenda for Africa's destiny. Our generation has a special responsibility to be the harbingers of a new African civilization, founded on the values of liberty, common humanity, and solidarity, which will lift the long-suffering African masses out of poverty into prosperity. An Africa which no longer depends on charity, aid, and handouts. An Africa which mobilizes Africa's own immeasurable resources to address Africa's problems. An Africa that has the capacity to deal with other continents on the basis of equality, and mutual respect. Truly, the project has to be Africa beyond aid. May I in advance thank you very warmly on the honor you are about to do me. Totally unmerited, but highly appreciated. Thank you very much. I wish you luck with your colloquium. Thank you very much for your attention. May God bless us all in our continent, Mother Africa.
President Akufo-Addo there at the PAWA Continental Colloquium being held at the Labadi Beach Hotel right this minute. You heard him say a lot of things, obviously repeating his mantra of the Africa beyond aid. We'll see how that goes. Obviously something that will be very good for all of us. But quickly, the president has been talking about, like I indicated earlier on, everything about the future, language having to do with everything, or language having everything to do with the future of Africans. In fact, that we have to gain the self-confidence that that comes from being independent, truly independent, so to speak. He also says that when actually telling them that when they write, what they write about must have integrity, and that we must be brutally frank about ourselves as Africans, writing what we ought to write. So he refers, of course, to the great African writers. He speaks about Amata Edu all the way up to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of this country, and then he speaks about how unpopular Mandarin Chinese language was, of course, until now. It is one of the most popular courses, by the way. He's also telling them to tell the African story truthfully and with flair, and not compromising on the integrity of the writer, obviously, will jeopardize the library.